Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to a new video. My name is Evelin Barta, and thank you so much, everybody who is supporting my work. And thank you so much, everyone who has subscribed to my other channel as well, which is called Esoterica with Evelin. So I wanted to say that it is very tied to what I'm discussing here, what I'm posting there. I'm sharing readings there, and please subscribe there if you haven't done it yet. Alright, so in today's video, there are a few things that I wanted to bring up. Two topics actually. One of them is the Russian and Ukrainian conflict that is still ongoing, and there's a high chance for it to escalate in the future. And the other one is the earthquake in Turkey and in Syria, and how they are being tied to each other, how they are being interconnected. So this is a very important topic to talk about. And I talked about the Russian and Ukrainian conflict in the past as well. And today I want to put it in a different context and to dig a little bit deeper into what is happening on a 3D level. So like in terms of operations, in terms of strategies as well. And it's important for us to understand that because we can connect the dots and we can understand what is the main goal of this agenda, this international agenda or globalist agenda, so to speak. So as we know, just recently there was a big earthquake in Turkey and in Syria, and a devastating earthquake. The victims are around 44,000. So that is the estimated number of lives that were lost in this earthquake. And this particular earthquake, beyond the fact that it is a tragedy, is raising loads of concerns and questions about the nature of this earthquake. I did a reading on that on my Patreon as well, if it was a natural occurrence or a manufactured one. But after doing my research about how things are escalating between Russia and Ukraine as well, and then NATO, right, like the US and Russia, we can see that there are a few weird coincidences that are raising questions in me as well, and probably in many people. This is very important. And it is happening at this time because many things, as we have noticed already in the past 3 years, have been coming up to the surface. The masses cannot be just fooled into believing the official narrative. There are many people that are questioning what is really going on. And now we arrive to the point when we can question the existence of these so-called weapons that are influencing our weather and can cause certain natural disasters that are being portrayed as natural. So the entire definition of conspiracy theories has changed in the past 3 years, and whatever was considered in the past conspiracy theory is no longer just a theory. Certain occurrences and events have proven to us in the past few years that our suspicion about an existing group that is controlling everything is true. And we are not only living in a profit-oriented world, but if we want to understand the big picture, we have to understand that this is not just a war that is going on a 3D level. This goes beyond that. This is going on an esoteric level. And the main purpose of it is control, is to pressure us human beings into handing over our free will to a force that is considering itself superior. Okay, so you are being forced into submission by living in a world that is unsafe, living in fear, and living in a survival mode. So as long as human beings are living in a survival mode, then they can be easily controlled and manipulated. And what is the best means to control a human population is if we unite that human population and we create a central governance for them. So that central governance is already existing, as we know, on an esoteric level. And if we are digging deep into how these very influential families are controlling the world, then we can understand that that central governance and background governance is already existing. And it is made by unelected individuals, unelected people that are wanting to influence the course of the events and planetary events as well. But that's not my point today, and it's not my point to say that this is not all about profit, this is about power. I talked about that in the past, so if you haven't seen those videos, then you will find loads of them on my channel where I talk about these things. But in today's video, I want to talk about specifically about this ongoing conflict and war between Russia and Ukraine, which is really a means to creating a one world governance And you will understand why I'm saying that later on in this video, but let's just say that it's much easier to manage a group of people if there are not too many of them. So there have been steps that have been made towards the reduction of the population, which is already happening. And unfortunately, we will be facing on the population in a few years. So that is one goal of this globalist agenda. The other goal is to unite these people in a sense that we will have a central governance for all of them, and like not countries as we know them today, not as they are existing today. And if we look at Asia, we are actually talking about certain powers there that are not easily convinced and forced into submission. So we need to turn the world against them. So we need to turn the Western world against them and create an ongoing conflict and trying to portray them as a threat for the Western world, a threat for our civilization. We will come up with all sorts of things from the climate change, that they are polluting, that they are destroying the planet. So Asia is destroying the planet. And when I talk about Asia, I talk about Russia and then China as well, and then India, and then these countries. So we will create all sorts of scenarios to try to convince people that those are our enemies. And I wanted to mention that I'm not pro-Russia and I'm not pro-Ukraine, not pro-China at all. I see some players that are all having their own agenda, and they are playing and they are fighting on the ego's playground, while civilians and innocent people that have nothing to do with this conflict, at least not on a 3D level, on an esoteric level, surely they do have to do, or metaphysical level, but that doesn't take anything away from their suffering and from the fact that there are millions of people dying of this conflict because of certain ego games. So I'm not pro any of these, but I just want to talk about these things for us to understand what is really going on, and to be able to connect the dots and to understand that we don't need to participate in this. There's a way out of this just by us saying that we don't want to participate. Also, it is very important for us not to see these people as the good guys and the bad guys. This is not about that. These are, as I said, ego games. And the spiritual community is full of people that are believing that certain groups, are white hats. And for example, Vladimir Putin is one of those guys. And I did a video about that on my Esoterica channel, reading about the truth about the white hats. And we have to be very careful with these kind of things, because this is very much like the mentality of the end that justifies the means. And we don't see the forest from the trees if we label certain people the good ones and certain people the bad ones. Also waiting for external forces like a group of, white hats or extraterrestrials to come and save humanity from destruction is taking away from our own power, and it's extremely disempowering, because it entails that you as a human being are incapable of spiritual progression and evolution and solving your own problems. You need someone external. So it's taking away from the internal work. So yeah, if you want to watch that video, I will link it there, because it is very much connected to what I want to talk about and my message in general. So going back to the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, there are certain international groups that are keen for this conflict between these two countries and the Western world and Russia to continue. And they seek to exploit it as a crisis of opportunity. There's openly admitted now that NATO is fully involved in this crisis, in this opportunity. The USA is involved, and now the UK is getting involved as well. And the UK Special Forces are about to start leading these Ukrainian troops, which actually opens the door to a much wider war and conflict between Russia and NATO. And it's very hard to say, but very hard to tell what is really going on, because the mainstream media is trying to distort the information. And there's a lot of propaganda coming from Ukraine as well, Ukrainian intelligence and then NATO as well. But it is very likely that the strategy of Russia, as we know from last year, is to eliminate key infrastructure in Ukraine, which is leading to the elimination of the power grid, for example. Last year in December, it was estimated Ukraine's power grid to be from 60% to 80% destroyed. And even in the areas that are the least damaged, the power grid is running at a 30% deficit. And the elimination, the destruction of the power grid and key infrastructure is actually a strategy of the USA that they used against Iraq. So this is what the USA did during the invasion of Iraq. And the mainstream media last year has argued a lot about these scenarios happening in Ukraine. They said that it wasn't possible it to happen, and yet it happened. They were wrong. So there's a lot of distortion of the information. There's a lot of propaganda that is still ongoing. And what is happening now is that there are a lot of weaponry, obviously, that is being sent to Ukraine by the USA. So the US and NATO is getting more and more involved in this war and is supporting Ukraine with weapons. However, the deliveries of the weapons are drawing down now. There's less and less support that Ukraine is receiving. And actually, I got that information when I did my predictions. I talked about that in my prediction video about 2023, that Ukraine will start receiving less and less help from the rest of the world. When I tuned into the energies of the country, this is what I received. But I also got that the war will be ongoing, so I don't see peace this year. So obviously, I don't usually get involved in politics. I don't really care. That is not my path. That is not something that I'm interested in. But after doing my research about what happened last year, like in terms of Russia's strategy, I am drawing my own conclusions, and I think we can say, if we really pay attention to what is going on, that Russia is playing the long game. And this grid targeting strategy is actually very logical, because what Russia wants to do is to push civilians out of big cities in Ukraine, or to push them out entirely of the country, because that means that in case of a more offensive effort, which is very much expected of Russia to make that move, the casualties, the number of casualties and the collateral damage is lower, and less people will die. And before we say that he's actually a white hat and he really cares about people, like Vladimir Putin really cares about other people, strategically that means something else. And I don't know how much he cares about people. I don't know what his consciousness is, how empathetic he is. But what this means strategically is that if there are less people living in big cities and less people living in the country, in Ukraine altogether, then the chance for them to die is lower. So we're gonna push out people of big cities and the country by targeting the power grids. So in case that we want to attack, there will be less civilian casualties. And what that means that if there are no casualties, there's no report about them on social media. And that means that the rest of the world will not know about it. Because let's not forget that we are living in the age of information. And that is making it very difficult for these military moves to remain a secret. They are making these moves very, very difficult, and these strategies very difficult as well. So less casualties, the best. Civilian casualties are really playing a big part in this whole thing. And back in the days of the war on terror, when the US has attacked Iraq and the Middle East, it would have been so much more difficult for the US to keep the information secret as it is now. So all these things, all those casualties wouldn't have happened if we lived in the age of information as we are living right now. Okay, so internet plays a very, very important part in this. And it is helping us to develop discernment and to ask questions about the agenda and the official narrative. So it is estimated that almost 3 million Ukrainians have joined Russia already, and that more than 20% of the population has fled to Europe. And I have to say that new offensive actions are expected of Russia, and they are very likely to happen this spring, just because strategically spring is, good for that. And let's not forget that Saturn is moving into Pisces in March. And during Saturn in Pisces transit, there were many historical events and then important invasions as well that happened. For example, the Vietnam War. that I talked about in my video called Saturn in Pisces. So it is very likely to happen a new attack or things to escalate if we are looking at history. So Russia is not done with this whole thing, that's for sure. And even though the mainstream media keeps talking about Russia being weakened and so on, and things calming down, and Russia running out of resources and these kind of things, the truth is that Russia is holding back right now and is waiting for the right moment. So I don't want to be very dramatic or to be very negative when it comes to future, but we have to be realistic. Whatever we are hearing in the mainstream media about Russia, backing off, it's not true. Russia is having more modern weaponry than the Western world. And unfortunately, we have to talk about weapons. We are still living in a world and an age where we think, and human beings think, that conflicts can only be resolved by using weapons. And NATO is supporting Ukraine as well with lots of weapons, and the US is supporting Ukraine with high technological, weapons. However, it takes a lot of time for the troops to be trained about how to use them, which is not going to happen overnight. And let's not forget that Belarus is an option as well to join Russia. And the mainstream media is arguing about that, and they are saying that that's not going to happen, but it's very likely to happen. And why I'm talking about these things now? I'm talking about this because if we understand that NATO will start weakening and the US will start weakening, that means that they will have to use another wild card, and that is the China-Taiwan conflict. China invading Taiwan and NATO again supporting Taiwan with weapons and everything. The reason behind that is, as I said, to force Asia and to force these countries into submission. NATO, after throwing billions in cash into Ukraine, they will need another wild card. They will need another conflict. And this can be the perfect one. And it has been escalating for a while. And again, like going back to the Saturn in Pisces transit, if we look at history, there were many events and many conflicts when this particular transit happened. There were many conflicts between China and Taiwan. So that can be an option as well. I wanted to highlight that too. So how does Turkey come into picture with all this? And I want to talk about that as well, and how that ties all together, and how we are getting to the earthquake and what happened in Turkey recently. So according to the Wall Street Journal, 15 Turkish companies export $18.5 million worth of equipment purchased in the US every month to Russian companies. And I don't want to get into the history of Turkey and the current president, but I wanted just to mention that have been certain attempts for the assassination of the current president by an organization, which I'm going to write there, but I don't want to say it out loud because you never know with this censorship. And long story short, the current president of Turkey was an that organization agent, was working for them, and it was very much against Russia. So it was kind of working together with the US. And as he became president, he has changed his views and he has changed sides as well. And even though Turkey is a member of NATO, it is still secretly supporting Russia. And there have been numerous attempts of the US to force Turkey into complying with Western rules. They are still secretly supporting Russia. In addition, obviously they are the bad guys now. In addition, they are blocking Sweden's NATO membership as well. And therefore, it is blocking Finland's NATO membership as well as a result. So it has just recently vetoed this membership for a coincidence, like just before, the earthquake happened. And if we are looking, and there are many suspicions now, people are very suspicious about this whole earthquake thing, because these earthquakes in Turkey and in Syria are not having the characteristics of a classical one, of any earthquakes observed so far anywhere in the world. And that is raising questions in people because, first of all, the intensity of the earthquakes is very unusual. And then 2 earthquakes happening one after the other consecutively with the same intensity. That is very unusual as well. Also, there was a releasing of information by the US Embassy just before the earthquake happened. And there were some Western countries that issued advice for people not to travel to Turkey just before this tragedy happened. Many Western ambassadors left Ankara as well in the 5 days preceding the earthquake. So it's very, very suspicious, and it seems like the Western world knew what is going to happen. So I think people and all of us are having all the reasons to be suspicious about this. And now actually there are investigations by the Turkish intelligence services about this tragedy being a natural occurrence or being something that is manufactured. So there are many, many things that are getting exposed, and the truth will get revealed, I believe, this year and then the years to come as well. And that is, again, I would say it's very important when it comes to humanity and us as a collective developing discernment. And that is the only way, and by using our intuition and by connecting, to that intuitive knowledge that is within us, that is actually discernment, that is the only way for us to say that we can choose differently to how we have done in the past. And we don't need to participate in these events. We do have the power and the free will to say no to these manufactured realities that they desperately want us to opt into. We do have the free will to do that. And the only way to do that is humanity to have a breakthrough when it comes to these illusions. Like, we have to wake up from this delusional state that we are powerless when it comes to these external forces, that we cannot change our reality, that we are not co-creators. We have to understand that we are the co-creators of our reality. And we don't need external forces and saviors to come to do the work for us. We can do that with the help of some exalted beings, of course, that are helping humanity, that are helping us to understand our true power and potential. But there's a big difference between a higher force and a lower force, because the higher force will try to make you understand that you do have the power, while a lower force will say that you are unable to survive or you are unable to thrive without them. And this is what we need to recognize. And that is why I wanted to talk about these things in today's video, for us to understand where things are going. And the future is not set in stone, and it's not a foregone conclusion. Wars are not a foregone conclusion for humanity. Natural disasters are not a foregone conclusion. Pandemics are not a foregone conclusion. These tragedies are not inevitable. These tragedies are not something that we need to experience. Obviously, there are certain karmic laws as well, but the karmic law entails you understanding that you have power over your karma, that you have the power to transmute your karma by transmuting your traumas as well. We need to understand this. We need to understand that we do have occult and esoteric power, and just because we are using our free will. All right, guys, so this is what I wanted to talk about today. I hope it resonated. If it did, please subscribe to this channel, and please subscribe to my other channel as well. If you want to support my work, you can do it on Patreon, and that is allowing me to create more content. Thank you so much, everybody who is already there. There I'm sharing insights about what is going on in our world, and then I'm doing readings about different topics as well, and then channeled guidance. So I'm sharing channeled information. And then also, if you want to book a personal reading, you will find information about that down below in the description box. Thank you so much, everybody, for your emails, for your amazing support. Thank you for being here. Take care, everybody, and I cannot wait to see you next time.